In the middle of a frozen Norwegian winter, beneath the shadow of Nazi occupation, a secret project was underway. A project that could have given Hitler the most terrifying weapon in human history. But somewhere in that darkness, 10 men prepared to do the impossible.
When Germany invaded Norway in 1940, they wanted more than control. They wanted resources, iron, aluminum, and water. Not just any water, heavy water. Hidden deep in the mountains above the town of Ryukin stood a hydroelectric plant called Vemork. It was built in the 1930s to produce hydrogen for fertilizer, but to German scientists it was something far greater, a gateway to nuclear energy. By 1942, Allied intelligence began to intercept whispers. The Nazis were building an atomic bomb, and the heart of that bomb would beat in Vemork. To Churchill, this was unacceptable. He called it the most important target in occupied Europe. But how do you destroy a fortress built into a cliff, surrounded by snow, watched by armed guards in the dead of winter? That question would set in motion one of the greatest acts of sabotage in history.
Before Gunnerside, there was Operation Freshman, a mission doomed from the start. In November 1942, 2 gliders filled with British commandos were towed across the North Sea toward Norway. The plan was simple: land near the plant, meet local resistance, plant explosives, and escape. But weather and navigation errors struck first. One glider crashed into a mountain. The other lost its tow rope and plummeted into the snow. Survivors were soon captured by the Gestapo. In defiance of the Geneva Convention, every one of them was executed. It was a devastating blow and a chilling message from the Nazis. But in London, a Norwegian officer named Leif Tronstad refused to give up. Tronstad, a scientist who had once worked at Vemork, knew its secrets better than anyone. He proposed a second attempt, one led not by foreign commandos, but by Norwegians. The mission would be called Gunnerside. The team consisted of 6 volunteers from the Norwegian resistance. Each man had escaped to Britain after the German invasion. They were young, hungry, and fiercely patriotic. Joachim Ronnenberg, the leader, calm but relentless, only 23 years old. Knut Haukelid, resourceful and quiet, with the instincts of a survivalist. Frederick Kaiser, Kasper Idland, Birger Stromsheim, and Trond Sarnes completed the team. They were trained by the British SOE, the Special Operations Executive, in the harsh Scottish Highlands. For months, they learned demolition tactics, parachuting, skiing, navigation, and how to survive with nothing. "We trained to disappear," Ronnenberg recalled, "to live off the land, to fight the cold, and to trust no one." When the day came, each man received a cyanide capsule. If captured, they were to take it before speaking. In February 1943, a British bomber carried the Gunnerside team across the North Sea. The men jumped into a storm, parachuting into the white void below. They landed miles from their intended point, scattered across the mountains. For days they fought the cold, dragging sleds through knee-deep snow. In the distance, the light of a small cabin flickered, the rendezvous. Inside
were 4 half-starved Norwegians from the failed Operation Freshman, the grouse team. They had survived for months by hunting reindeer and melting snow for water. When Ronneberg entered, one of them whispered, "We thought you'd never come." He replied, "Neither did we." Now united, 10 men prepared to strike.
They studied maps in candlelight, memorizing every path and guard rotation. They couldn't approach from the front. It was mined and fenced. The only way in was through the ravine, a 200-meter drop of ice and rock. Ronneberg divided the team. One group would guard the bridge, the other would plant the charges. Each man carried explosives, fuses, and a pistol. If discovered, they would fight to the last bullet. Failure was not an option, said Haukelid later. The world depended on us, and we were just 10 men with skis.
The night of February 27th, 1943, a snowstorm swept across the valley, their perfect cover. The men crossed the frozen river, the sound of wind masking every step. They reached the ravine and began to climb, gripping the rock with numb hands. Inside the plant, German guards sat in the warmth, playing cards, unaware that death was crawling beneath their feet. Ronneberg and Kaiser reached the cable tunnel leading into the basement. They cut through the wire, slipped inside, and found themselves in a maze of pipes and machinery. Steam hissed through the air. The heavy water cells were just ahead, steel cylinders lined up in perfect order. It was so quiet, Ronneberg remembered. We could hear our own hearts. They planted the explosives carefully, setting 30-second fuses. As they prepared to leave, one guard began walking toward the basement door. He stopped, turned around, and left. 30 seconds later, a muted boom. The lights flickered. The smell of ammonia filled the air. Heavy water, thousands of liters, flooded the floor. They ran.
Alarms blared across Vemork. German soldiers scrambled through the snow, shouting orders, but the saboteurs were already gone, ghosts on skis, vanishing into the blizzard. They climbed through the night, covering their tracks. Behind them, Vemork burned with confusion. By dawn, they were deep in the mountains. They divided into smaller groups, some heading to Oslo to continue resistance, others toward Sweden. Ronneberg's group skied 400 kilometers through brutal weather, hunted by hundreds of German troops. At one point, they hid under a bridge as soldiers marched above them. Snow fell silently between the cracks. No one spoke. If one man coughed, we were dead, said Idland years later. After 2 weeks of endless cold and hunger, they reached the Swedish border. The war wasn't over, but their mission was. The Germans quickly repaired the Vemork plant, but the damage was done. Their production of heavy water was crippled. Later, when they tried to move the remaining stockpile to Germany, the Allies sank the ferry carrying it across Lake Tinshore, ensuring no trace of heavy water reached Nazi scientists. The German atomic project collapsed soon after. Years later, declassified documents revealed that the mission likely prevented the Nazis from ever developing a functional nuclear weapon. Historians estimate that if Hitler had succeeded, the course of World War II
and the 20th century would have changed forever.
After the war, the men of Gunnerside returned to quiet lives. They rarely spoke of their mission. When asked how it felt to be heroes, Rønneberg replied, "We were just doing our duty. We were lucky to survive. Others did not." In 1965, he visited the ruins of the Vemork plant for the first time since the attack. He walked through the tunnels, now silent and cold. A single pipe, twisted from the explosion, still hung from the ceiling. "We did what we had to do, and that was enough." Operation Gunnerside remains a symbol of courage, intelligence, and resistance. A story of ordinary men who stopped an unstoppable enemy. Sometimes, the fate of the world rests not on great armies or powerful nations, but on the quiet bravery of a few.